And we're here with Rob Mesereau. He's a partner at PwC. Rob, first of all, thanks for being with us.
Good morning, Abe. Good to be with you.
Now, of course, we're just following TIA's, or in part, TIA's board meeting. Your colleague, Dan, gave a great presentation to the board members about sort of the state of the industry from several vantage points. We'll touch on some of those right now. I want to talk about the significant changes, not only in the industry environment, but also in the regulatory environment with the new administration. But before we get into that, I want to ask you this. I want to talk about where the state of the industry is now, from your perspective, but really a strategy for growth for the industry at large, but also for equipment suppliers that happen to be at the meeting today.
Sure. So, we're seeing positive disruption across many different areas of the ecosystem. So, we are moving into a software-defined future, and I think that's the reality. And I think as it pertains to TIA's community in particular, they're suppliers, they're hardware suppliers, and this is a virtualized world. So how does somebody who's used to selling large racks of equipment pivot and build a business based on virtualization and cloud services? And I think that's really the challenge.
So I want to get into really the shifts and pivots in the industry environment, like I said, and also the regulatory environment. Let's start with the industry. Can you give us an example maybe between the wireless carriers and the cable operators?
Yeah, that's a great question because there really is no difference between a wireless carrier and a cable operator now. I'm sort of grouped them all, and in fact, the FCC and through policy, they have grouped them. They call them ISPs, and in fact, if you look closely at Title II, it refers to them as utilities, which is what none of them want to be. So at one side of the scale, you've got access providers, ISPs, so cable operators, wireless carriers, telcos, et cetera. The other end of the ecosystem, you have edge providers. And right now, this moment in time, they're being, from a privacy standpoint, regulated by two different entities. And I think, it's not a level playing field at the moment. And I think that's another challenge for TIA as well as for the ISPs, access providers.
I'd like to just segue from Title II to the significant shifts with the new administration on the regulatory environment, talking about net neutrality, but also privacy. What shifts do you expect there?
Well, it's interesting, and while nobody really knows what the new administration is going to bring, I think we know that we can speculate that there's going to be a lighter regulatory touch. I think we may see them make some moves to create maybe more of a level playing field. I think there's going to be less impediments, particularly for the large cable operators and telcos. ISPs. We have to come up with the right name for them. I like to call them access providers. So for the access providers, I think from a regulatory standpoint, things could get a little easier for them.
Now, this has no impact on the high bandwidth spectrum auctions at all. Is that correct?
No, it will not. It will not. In fact, the high bandwidth spectrum auctions are going to be vital to 5G deployments and development.
Now, we talked sort of on our pre-panel discussion, if you will, about the economics of network virtualization. But from a supplier standpoint, I'd like to just sort of rewind the clock just a bit to our previous discussion. What would be the strategy for growth, again, for the suppliers and identifying maybe new revenue streams for them as well?
Well, for what I do inside of PwC for the practice, I think about a lot of these elements, and I talk to a lot of suppliers and I talk to network providers, and I'm constantly finding myself saying the same thing in the sense that data is not a byproduct of the service that you provide, or whether it be IoT or other types of mobile or delivery of content. Data is the product, not the byproduct. It is the product. And I think the more that these industries can get focused on how do I responsibly turn data into action will be a key to unlocking their future.
It seems to me, and jumping back on the regulatory side of the discussion, that carriers and equipment suppliers in the telco space will benefit greatly via the Trump administration, where there'll be lighter regulation or a complete pivot from net neutrality and other restraints that we've experienced over, let's say, the past 2, 3, 4 years. Would you agree with that?
That's a big statement. Benefit greatly? I don't know. Will they benefit if I had to put money on it? Yeah, I think from a regulatory standpoint, the road's going to be a little easier. But considering the road ahead, making things a little bit easier doesn't, immediately solve all your problems, particularly from a regulatory standpoint. Is it going to be easier? Yes, I agree with that statement.
A couple days ago, there was a big article in the Washington Post about sort of the various verticals that would be the winners and losers via or post-election time, right? So there was the winners, the undecided, and there were the losers category. Telcos were in the losers category, and I think they were there because they were looking from the vantage point of the consumer, that they might be infringed upon as far as net neutrality or privacy. But from an equipment supplier or an industry standpoint, do you see a real loser category for the telco industry post-election?
Pre-election, post-election, I don't think the future changes that much for these guys. I think they still need to be focused on how do they pivot as an industry and get focused, use their core competencies to get focused on different areas of the ecosystem. I think that's very important. You can't continue to sell large racks of hardware to people that just simply, it's not sustainable.
Before we go, there's one thing again you said during the pre-panel discussion about last mile connectivity and sort of a sea change in that space. What was that? What were you referring to?
So this is referring to the high band spectrum auction and the advent, really the beginning of that 5G transition. So when people think about 5G, they tend to think about large high bandwidth opportunities, and not having to dig through neighborhoods to lay fiber is really a game changer. And it starts to make you think, well, okay, now I'm starting to understand maybe Time Warner, AT&T a little more now, because now I'm going to be delivering all kinds of products and services, including content, and I won't have to, again, dredge through neighborhoods to do that. So I think that's a real opportunity for the carriers. I think there's an opportunity there for the suppliers. I think the suppliers also have to be thinking about sensors and everything, about, again, this collection, about this responsibly turning data into action. I think that's going to be a key for these folks. And then, we can all talk about fun things like drone fleet management and connected cars.
Rob, if you can tell Dan, thanks so much on TIA's behalf for presenting in front of TIA board members, and thank you for your time being with us.
You bet.
Thanks, Rob.